There are moments in history that feel as if they were destined to happen, as if an unseen force was guiding the course of events. The birth of the United States was one such moment, a nation forged in the fires of revolution, built upon ideals of freedom, but also something more, something deeper. Some believe that America's existence was foretold long before it became a reality, hidden in prophecies, written in ancient scriptures, and whispered through visions given to men of faith. Could it be that the United States was not just a political experiment, but a nation designed for a greater purpose? Biblical passages, historical records, and the words of early settlers seem to suggest that America was meant to exist by divine will. But if this is true, then there's another question that must be answered. What was America's original purpose? And what happens when a nation turns away from its destiny? Today, we will explore the prophecies that shaped the birth of the United States, the spiritual foundations that guided its early years, and what they could mean for the future. The answers may surprise you. To understand whether the United States was predestined for a unique role in history, we must look beyond politics and wars. The idea of a divinely ordained nation is not new. Throughout the Bible, we see God raising up empires for specific purposes. Babylon, Persia, Rome, each played a role in fulfilling God's greater plan. Could America be part of that same pattern? Some believe that certain biblical passages hint at a distant land, set apart for a purpose yet to be fully revealed. One of the most mysterious passages is found in Isaiah 18:7, which speaks of a people from a nation feared far and wide, located beyond great rivers. At that time, gifts will be brought to the Lord Almighty from a people tall and smooth-skinned, from a people feared far and wide, an aggressive nation of strange speech, whose land is divided by rivers. The gifts will be brought to Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord Almighty. Isaiah 18:7, Nivi. Some scholars argue that this passage might hint at an unknown land, a place across vast waters that would one day become significant in the world. But prophecy isn't just found in ancient texts, it is also reflected in the beliefs of those who built America. From the earliest settlers to the founding fathers, many believed that this nation was chosen for a divine mission. The Pilgrims, the Puritans, and later revivalists, such as Jonathan Edwards, all spoke of America in a way that suggested more than mere chance. It was a land set apart by God Himself. But if America was meant to exist, what was its original purpose? The answer may lie in the covenant made by its earliest settlers. Long before the American Revolution, before the Founding Fathers drafted the Declaration of Independence, another group of men and women arrived on the shores of what would become the United States. The Pilgrims, seeking religious freedom, believed that their journey was not just a physical voyage, but a divine calling, one that mirrored the biblical exodus of Israel from Egypt. In 1620, when the Mayflower reached the New World, the Pilgrims knew they were about to build something entirely new, but they did not see themselves as merely settlers or explorers. To them, their journey was guided by God, and their success would depend on their faithfulness to Him. Before even stepping onto the land, they made a covenant, a sacred agreement, not just among themselves, but between them and God. This covenant was recorded in what is known as the Mayflower Compact, a document that many consider to be the spiritual foundation of the United States. They wrote, "In the name of God, Amen. Having undertaken, for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia." This was more than just a legal agreement, it was a spiritual declaration. The Pilgrims saw their settlement as a new beginning, a land where they could worship freely and live according to biblical principles. They believed that if they honored God, He would bless the land they were building. Many of them referenced 2 Samuel 7:10, where God promises, "I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed." Was America this new place? Was it a land set apart by God, much like Israel had been? As the colonies grew, this belief did not fade. It intensified. More and more, religious leaders and settlers alike began to see America not just as a new land, but as a nation with a divine mission. And one man, in particular, would take this belief to another level. Jonathan Edwards, a preacher whose words would ignite the first Great Awakening and shape the spiritual foundation of America. As the American colonies grew, so did the idea that they were part of a divine plan. But it wasn't just political leaders or settlers who believed this. Some of the most powerful voices came from the pulpits. One of those voices was Jonathan Edwards, a preacher and theologian who became one of the most important figures of the First Great Awakening, a spiritual revival that swept through the colonies in the 1730s and 1740s. Edwards believed that God was preparing something great in America, but that it would only come through spiritual renewal and obedience to God's will. His sermons were not just about personal salvation, they spoke of national destiny. He warned that if America was truly chosen by God, then the people had a responsibility. When God has something very great to accomplish for His church, it is His will that there should precede it the extraordinary prayers of His people. This was a warning and a promise. Edwards believed that America had a role to play in God's plan, but that it could not be fulfilled without a revival of faith. His most famous sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," was not just about judgment. It was a call to repentance, a plea for the people to recognize that their fate, both as individuals and as a nation, was in God's hands. The impact of the First Great Awakening was enormous. Thousands were converted, churches grew stronger, and a sense of divine purpose swept through the colonies. Many began to see themselves not just as settlers, but as part of a new covenant with God, one that would shape the very foundation of the country. But what would this new covenant nation look like? And would it be able to stand against the greatest empire in the world? As tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain escalated, another figure emerged, one who would not only lead a revolution, but would reportedly receive a prophetic vision about the future of the United States. The American Revolution was more than just a political struggle. For many, it was a spiritual battle as well. The idea that the United States was meant to exist, that it was part of a divine plan, was deeply ingrained in the hearts of many revolutionaries. But perhaps no figure in the war carried this belief more than George Washington himself. Washington was not just the commander of the Continental Army. He was a man of deep faith who believed that God's hand was guiding the birth of the nation. On numerous occasions, he spoke about divine providence, claiming that the survival of the American army against the mighty British Empire was nothing short of miraculous. But there is one story, one that has been debated for centuries, that suggests Washington may have even received a prophetic vision about America's future. The harsh winter at Valley Forge in 1777 was one of the darkest moments of the war. Washington's army was starving, freezing, and on the verge of collapse. It seemed impossible that they could defeat the world's most powerful military. According to an old legend, it was during this time that Washington had a vision, a moment where he was reportedly visited by a heavenly messenger who revealed three great trials that America would face. The war for independence. The first vision showed the struggle against the British, but divine intervention ensured that the new nation would be victorious. A second great crisis. The second vision revealed a future war that would test the unity of the nation from within, a conflict that many believe represented the Civil War. the final struggle. The third and most terrifying vision depicted a great battle where the United States would be attacked by foreign enemies. But in the darkest hour, divine forces would intervene once again, securing the nation's survival. This account was later recorded by Anthony Sherman, one of Washington's officers, who claimed that Washington himself had shared this vision with him. Though historians debate its authenticity, the story reflects a deep belief that America was not just another country, it was a nation under divine protection. Washington himself often spoke of God's guidance in the founding of the United States. He once wrote, "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand, which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States." But there was a warning attached to this belief. Washington, like many of the founding fathers, knew that if America was truly chosen by God, then the nation had a responsibility to remain faithful to its moral and spiritual foundations. So the question arises, if America was built on divine principles, what happens when it turns away from them? This question would become even more urgent as the nation moved forward, growing in power, wealth, and influence, but also facing spiritual and moral challenges that threatened its very foundation. And that brings us to the next mystery. Could the Bible itself contain warnings about the fate of America? If the United States was founded with a divine purpose, then its destiny is not just written in history, it is written in prophecy. But biblical prophecy is not just about blessings, it is also about warnings. Throughout the Old Testament, God blesses nations that follow his commandments, but he also removes his favor when they turn away from him. One of the clearest examples is found in Deuteronomy 28, where God outlines both the blessings of obedience and the curses of disobedience for nations that claim to follow him. The promise: if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. Deuteronomy 28:1. For generations, many Americans believed that this promise applied to their country. They saw the rise of America as a sign of God's blessing, much like ancient Israel when it followed God's laws. The United States quickly became the most powerful and prosperous nation in history, leading the world in innovation, military strength, and economic growth. But the prophecy continues with a warning that is just as important. The consequence. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Deuteronomy 28:15. God warns that if a nation turns away from him, it will face division, economic collapse, and even destruction from foreign enemies. Many believe that America has slowly been drifting away from its spiritual foundations, abandoning prayer, moral values, and the biblical principles that once guided its people. The country has seen increasing political division, social unrest, and internal conflicts that threaten to tear it apart. Could these events be signs that America is following the same pattern as ancient Israel, blessed when faithful, but vulnerable when it turns away? Some theologians have pointed to Isaiah 9:10 as a prophetic warning. In this passage, Israel, after suffering an attack, boasts that it will rebuild stronger without seeking God's help. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. The fig trees have been felled, but we will replace them with cedars. Isaiah 9:10. This defiant attitude led to further destruction. Some have connected this passage to events in modern American history, most notably the 9/11 attacks, where some political leaders unknowingly quoted this exact verse in speeches about rebuilding. Was this a coincidence or a prophetic sign that America was following the same path as ancient Israel? The Bible is clear. A nation's destiny is determined by its relationship with God. So the real question is America at a turning point? Does the United States still have time to reclaim its divine purpose, or has it already passed the point of no return? Some believe that another great awakening, a massive spiritual revival, could restore America's spiritual foundation, just as past revivals shaped its history. Others warn that if the nation continues on its current path, it may face judgment, division, or even collapse. The fate of America may not yet be sealed. But one thing is certain: history has shown that God moves through those who seek Him, and perhaps, just as before, another great revival is still possible. The story of the United States is unlike any other. From its earliest days, there were those who believed that this nation was set apart, a land built on faith, freedom, and divine purpose. But as history has shown, a nation's destiny is not guaranteed. The Bible is filled with examples of nations that rose and fell, depending on their obedience to God. Ancient Israel was chosen, blessed, and given a covenant. But when it turned away from God, it faced judgment, division, and exile. Could the same principle apply to the United States? The warnings are clear. If a nation follows God, it will be blessed. Deuteronomy 28, 1-14. If a nation turns from God, it will face consequences. Deuteronomy 28, 15-68. For over 2 centuries, America has stood as a beacon of freedom and a force for good in the world. But in recent times, the country has drifted further from the spiritual foundations that made it strong. The question is no longer what has happened in the past, but rather what will happen next. Is there still hope for America? Many believe that just as past revivals, like the First and Second Great Awakenings, shaped the nation's history, another revival could change its future. But revival does not come from politicians or governments. It comes from individuals who seek God with all their hearts. In 2 Chronicles 7:14, God gives a promise that applies not just to Israel, but to any nation willing to return to Him. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. 2 Chronicles 7:14 NIV. The future of the United States may not be written in stone, but it is written in the hearts of those who still seek God. America was founded on a covenant. And like all covenants, it requires faithfulness to remain intact. The choice is not just collective, it is personal. Will America turn back to God and reclaim its prophetic destiny, or will it continue down a path that leads to spiritual and national decline? The answer is in our hands. Call to action. If this message has made you think, if you believe America's story is not over yet, help spread the word. Like this video, if you believe America still has a divine purpose, share this message so more people can reflect on the spiritual destiny of this nation. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the mysteries of faith, history, and prophecy. The past has spoken. The question is, will we listen?